And I want to welcome my co-host tonight, Tara Marsden, from the Gitanyow Nation. She holds the name Naxginkw, works as the Wilp Sustainability Director for the Gitanyow Hereditary Chiefs, and she's dialing in from Hazelton tonight, where she lives with her 2 kids. Welcome, Tara.
Thanks, Kai. Amayuksa, Gitxsan Nation, Good evening. I'm very happy to see all of the panelists and to see the names in the chat and the names in the participant list. I can't see people's faces, but your interest and your support is definitely appreciated. So thank you and welcome. So tonight we are talking about the PRGT pipeline, and we are co-hosting this, Gitanyow Hereditary Chiefs and the Dogwood Initiative. So thank you to Alexandra, Paige, and Kai for all of their technical support and for organizing our event. We're aiming to be an hour, and so a nice short update on what is going on currently with PRGT pipeline and the Lisims terminal, and what is the Indigenous-led resistance that is happening throughout the Gitanyow, the Gitxsan, the Nisga'a, and other nations. And so I'm really pleased to be joined by a number of panelists who I'll introduce, but I first wanted to kind of acknowledge the name of our webinar tonight, which is the Pipeline to Nowhere, and why we kind of thought of that is that a lot of people are aware that there is some construction activity that's currently started. It's in a very small percentage of the whole pipeline right-of-way, which is around 800 kilometers in length. So less than 1% is actually being constructed. The rest has quite a few hurdles to get through to start construction on this pipeline. It also doesn't have a current approved terminal. And so the original terminal was supposed to be at Lilu Island, and now it is being proposed to be at Pierce Island in the Nass estuary. And so we're going to hear from Nisga'a member tonight on what that construction activity looks like. And we're also going to hear about some of the concerns being raised on the pipeline itself, as well as the terminal. And so welcome, and I'm going to introduce our panelists. So we're first joined by Stephen Nyce, and Stephen is a Nisga'a hereditary name holder from Gitwinksihlkw. He's a residential school survivor, a former logger and commercial fisherman. And this fall, he's been raising concerns about the impact of the PRGT pipeline construction in the Nass Valley. Welcome, Stephen. And next is Taylor Wale. She's a member of the Lachkabu Wilpsquoint, and she currently works with the Gitxsan Watershed Authority, managing research and restoration projects, conducting field work, and serving as a liaison to bolster the involvement and agency of hereditary leaders within the Gitxsan watershed. And last but not least, we're joined by Kolin Sutherland-Wilson, who's a member of Wilp Sustainability in the Gitxsan village of Kispiox. He also serves as the elected chief councillor of the Kispiox Band, which is suing the BC Energy Regulator over its handling of the PRGT pipeline. And welcome to all of you, and we will be hearing from you shortly. Before we jump into our panelists, we're going to get a bit of context setting from Kai, who's currently up on the Cranberry Connector in a vehicle of some sort, hiding from the rain, and hopefully your Wi-Fi will continue to be strong. So Kai, please take it away with a bit of slideshow, a very short slideshow, and then into our panel discussion.
Okay, thanks a lot, Tara, and I'll just share this PowerPoint. Make sure you can see the slides here. How's that looking?
Looking good.
Okay. All right, so here is your 5-minute project update on the Prince Rupert Gas Transmission Pipeline, also called PRGT. And this is a project, as Tara mentioned, that was approved by the BC Liberal government back in 2014, 10 years ago. And it was originally supposed to carry fracked gas northeast BC along that blue line you can see there to an LNG terminal on Lilu Island. Lilu Island is at the mouth of the Skeena River, and it's this crucial stopover point for juvenile salmon that are coming down the Skeena River every spring. It's where they go to fatten up before they head out into the ocean, and it's a linchpin for food security for the entire region. And so this was not an acceptable place to put a terminal, and Tsimshian land defenders occupied Lilu Island and blocked construction. And they were supported by people throughout the watershed, including some of the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs, who you might recognize from the Coastal GasLink struggle. And they were down there 10 years ago, helping the Tsimshian fight Petronas. The Lakwalams community voted no to $1 billion deal with Petronas, and that really started the dominoes falling for that project. And eventually in 2017, the company, which is Malaysia's state-owned oil company, pulled the plug on the terminal and PRGT was dead, or so we thought. Here's what happened this spring. In June, TC Energy, which is the same company that built Coastal GasLink, they suddenly sold the project to a pair of partners, the Nisga'a Lisims government, which is the elected treaty government in Nyce, and Western LNG, which is a private equity-backed shell company based in Houston, Texas, that has never built a project before. So those are the two partners that now own the PRGT project. And they announced that they've contracted Bechtel to lead construction for the whole project. And this fall, Ledcor is the company that's running construction on Nisga'a lands as we speak. So those are the companies behind the project now. And this summer, they announced this limited construction program. And you can see the purple line there, that's the pipeline route along the Nass River. And this is entirely on the Nisga'a Treaty lands, which you can see here in gray, on either side of the Lava Bed Memorial Park. So that's the man camp down by Dragon Lake that they're building right now. And that's the construction that we're going to talk about with Stephen in a minute. At the same time, they applied for an amendment with the BC Environmental Assessment Office to change the location of the terminal, or more accurately, to add another terminal, which is on an island called Pierce Island, right on the U.S. border, and that would allow this pipeline to service the proposed Lisims LNG terminal, which the Nisga'a Nation has proposed along with partners in the oil and gas sector in Alberta and Texas. So all of this happened in July and August. Meanwhile, Nisga'a citizens were voicing their discontent with the project. This man, Cecil Mercer Jr., took a petition around and got more than 200 signatures in the Nisga'a villages opposing construction. And despite having no approved terminal location, having no approved route for the pipeline, having no investors, the company started moving equipment into place to start building in August. That's when the Gitanyow Nation jumped into action, and Hereditary Chiefs in Gitanyow decided to burn their pipeline agreements that they had signed with TC Energy 10 years ago. And so this is a picture from that day in late August at Cranberry Junction here on Gitanyow territory, where the Chiefs invited community members and youth to actually set fire to the contract from 2014. And you can see Taylor there under the Nass Forest Service Road sign, grinning away as that pipeline agreement burned. And the Chiefs immediately set up a roadblock and denied access to LNG traffic through their territory, bringing equipment and trailers through to the man camp. So 9 weeks later, the Ghaneda clan and allies are still holding the road and letting every vehicle that comes through, government, police, loggers, industry, letting them know about the project and the fact that it's not going to be coming through Gitanyow territory. And so that's where I'm sitting tonight. Meanwhile, and she's given me permission to share this, Gitxsan land defenders have set up another camp about 35 kilometers east of us on the PRGT route. This is Teresa Brown. She's a Gitxsan grandma who has opened a dog rescue on the pipeline route, and she's moved back out to her own territory, and she's building a little village on the pipeline route as we speak. So during all this time, as the communities have been organizing, Ledcor has been cutting right-of-way relentlessly across Nisga'a lands. And so they have a plan to cut 43 kilometers of right-of-way. And many Nisga'a people are finding out about this for the first time as they go out to engage in hunting or mushroom picking or other traditional land uses. And they're finding signs put up by the pipeline companies saying no hunting, or they're going out to their mushroom grounds and it's just been wiped out by heavy machines. And so people in the Nass are starting to raise questions about where all this is going, and we'll talk about that with Stephen some more. But the Nisga'a Lisims government, which now owns the project and is the proponent, is facing some really serious questions from its own people about how much this is going to cost them, and what kind of a gamble is being taken with the nation's resources and with their territory and all of the tributaries to the Nass River, which is the backbone of food security for so many communities. So the Nisga'a government is facing an election in a couple of weeks, and this issue is starting to bubble up in that election as well. And at the same time, the BC Energy Regulator is facing a lawsuit from local communities over their handling of PRGT. So we'll hear from Kolin more about that lawsuit and where that is headed. But you can see that the opposition is really stacking up in the region from Nisga'a territory through Gitanyow and Gitxsan territory. And it's the Kispiox Band that's leading this lawsuit against the BC Energy Regulator. So construction continues until November 25th. That's when the project certificate expires. And so the company is trying to get as much right-of-way cut as they can in order to apply for a substantial start. And that's the loophole where if they can convince the BC Environment Minister that they've made a substantial start to the project, then the Environment Minister can bring it back from the dead and issue a certificate that would last forever. However, we don't have an Environment Minister right now in BC. We don't have any ministers because we just had an election and it's too close to call. And so we're in this really interesting situation right now where the Green Party potentially could have the balance of power, and where PRGT is very much in play. And the uncertainty and the risk for this project is only continuing to grow. So I'll leave it there. And yeah, I was just curious, Tara, if you had any thoughts about this bizarre election outcome and what opportunities you see as the parties start to haggle over who holds power.
Yeah, it definitely does bring, as you said, a lot more uncertainty to the project and the timing of this substantial start application, which is expected shortly after they complete their construction work. And if there is a challenge to any of the results, the recounts that are happening later this week, or if there's a coalition government that has to be formed to actually govern, then we're going to see likely that to be a Green NDP coalition. And the Greens came out very strong in their campaign regarding LNG and saying that LNG is not the climate solution that it is being sold as, that it is actually worse than coal in many cases, and that the consent of some Indigenous people is not enough. It has to be consent of all, that the United Nations Declaration continues to stand. And so that's the kind of message that we hope gets carried through to any type of coalition government if it comes to that. If it's a conservative government, if some of those votes that are still being counted end up on the conservative side, I think we're going to see a very reckless government coming into power, wanting to approve this regardless of the concerns being raised. And they'll just be even riper for judicial reviews and court actions. So I feel hopeful. Uncertainty can be on our side in this case, and we'll hear more about all the different ideas and strategies that are being considered by some of our neighbors and Indigenous allies.
Well, let's start hearing from our panelists along the route of the pipeline. Stephen, I wanted to bring you in first. You went out with your dad, Jacob, right onto his territory, and I was curious, what was it like seeing the pipeline construction for the first time? And yeah, what went through your head when you first stumbled across the right of way?
Well, that day I chose to go down. I don't usually go down, but this day I chose to go down, and coming up to the route and seeing the destruction they have caused in such a short period of time is pretty devastating. This is our traditional hunting grounds. This is a wildlife corridor, private land. And now it's got a big swath right through the middle of it, you know, and seeing that and hearing the people talk that worked on that site saying we don't have any rights and threatening me. That It's very hard to take. This is my dad's land. My dad is 95 years old. He gave us permission to go down to see what was going on, and we took him down there. He's pretty devastated of the way these companies are working today. And we don't approve of that. You first must ask permission from a traditional landowner to go on that individual's land and to do some work or to hunt or to fish. But for these guys just to come and drop their machines on the side of the road, run on my dad's land and start stripping it for the sake of a pipeline. I don't believe that these people think about what they do. When they look at destruction, it's not destruction that they look at. It's the money that's in their pocket. They'll be gone after the pipeline is in. But we have to live here, and we have to see this. People are noticing it now, coming to Chalsap. And then people going up the other way towards Naxginkw are noticing destruction up there. So it's pretty hard for us to fathom what's going on because we did not know that this was going to happen.
Now that people are finding out, what kind of reactions are you hearing from people in the Nass Valley?
Well, most of us are not opposed. We can't be now because of the situation we're in. But most of us do not agree with the route that was taken and done without our knowledge. This was done in 2014. Our people just found out about this route and this deal in June of this year. We want answers. We want to know how much this is costing us. What was put up besides the land that was given for the pipeline construction? Land that did not belong to the Nisga'a Lisims government. These lands that this pipeline is going to belongs to hereditary chiefs in the Lisims. So a lot of them really haven't seen the destruction that has been caused on their territory. We're not only worried about that. They are going through all our wildlife habitat, right down to 10 Mile, to Nisga'a Gulf. They're destroying all the wildlife habitat, wildlife corridors. They'll be going into grizzly corridors in some area. And we don't know what has been done so far. Because in the last 3 months since August, I have never seen so much destruction on our land and without anybody worrying about it. Our people must wake up and really take a look at what this is and start asking questions. Some of us say that this was going to happen. Yes, but as my late uncle James Gosnell said, progress should not happen at the expense of our people. This pipeline that's going through our nation is happening at the expense of our people. They are destroying our people's hunting areas. And as you said earlier, they are starting to put up no trespassing signs. Imagine that. No trespassing signs on our 8% and our land. Some people say we don't have a right to speak. Some people say that I should look at the carbon footprint I'm leaving behind. Well, I'll say to those people, I'm not talking about the carbon footprint. I'm talking about the survival of our people. Where are we going to get our food in years to come once this pipeline is done? Where are we going to get our salmon and our oilcans? There is restrictions once this thing comes on. You look at where they want to put another station. It's not only in Pierce Island. It's around the point of Gitxsan. Imagine that. Somewhere we've been harvesting our cultural foods for hundreds of years. And now they want to put a pumping station there for gas. Nobody told our people about this. So I'll say again, what is this costing us? What have we given up before? I think I am just so frustrated on the way things are going. We are not told and are not allowed to ask anything. We have tried to ask, how much is this going to cost us? But it's confidential.
Right.
You know, confidential, it doesn't cut it for me. This is the money that belongs to the nation. And we have a right to know what they have done.
I can hear the frustration in your voice, and I want to help you get those answers. You live in such a beautiful part of the world, coming down and visiting and contrasting the Nass Valley with the work that Ledcor is doing. It's really shocking to imagine the gas terminal there, an undersea pipeline right through all the halibut fishing grounds, and then that route that's being cut through the valley. Stephen, I want to come back to you later in the hour, but I want to hear from our other panelists along the route as well. So I'm gonna go to Taylor now, because you're in Gitxsan territory, just east of where this work is happening, but you've also seen the work that happened on Coastal GasLink on Wet'suwet'en territory to the east. You're a fish biologist. You're also a sports coach and a leader with youth in the community. And I'm curious what concerns you're hearing from people in the Gitxsan Nation.
Yeah, what I'm hearing from, first and foremost, from the land and the waters and the fish that I get to work with, is that we're already near a state of emergency. The conditions and the trajectory of drought in our region, in combination with the already declining state of the salmon, is a huge cause for concern. We're seeing major spawning tributaries going completely dry. During the adult migration, we're seeing lethal water temperatures, an increase in downstream predation. We're seeing juvenile salmon getting stranded in pools, and so many other factors already coming together, accumulating all on the backs of wild salmon, even before we even start to consider the impacts of this proposed pipeline. This whole last week at work, we are facilitating community engagement sessions and technical working group discussions to build out a plan for rebuilding the resiliency of Kispiox, ironically, which are a threatened stock at risk of becoming endangered. So they're already in kind of the red zone, and also exist where a lot of the water crossings are. And that's a similar state to other wild salmon species in our territories. Our fish populations are struggling and are such a strong indicator for the health of our lands and waters. So here we are, busying ourselves, bringing together all of these community members, knowledge keepers, Simgiget or chiefs, and technical experts coming together, laying out all of our concerns and trying to design projects and work plans to support the rebuilding and the protection of these endangered fish and their habitats. Meanwhile, leadership is working behind the scenes to force this pipeline through the territories and create massive disturbances to fish and fish habitat at nearly every important water crossing that I could name throughout our territories. So what I'm hearing is that people are frustrated and people are burnt out. And it's really hard to not feel exhausted by the lack of cohesion and integrity at kind of a nation level, but also a regional scale. It really reminds me of a similar situation that I got to witness a couple years ago, being a part of technical meetings for the Maurice River or Gitwinkwa sockeye rebuilding plan. So a very similar process. And I remember someone from DFO or Wet'suwet'en Fisheries presenting some data results following sockeye being tracked back to their spawning grounds to answer some of their research questions and support their rebuilding. In this project, the fish were being tracked with radio telemetry, which for those who know is a super expensive way to track sockeye during the adult migration, which was also right at the exact time that Coastal GasLink pipeline decided to do some construction for one of their crossings along that river, which ended up being a total shit show and looked nothing like the proposed works, which were of course very tidy and mitigated all impacts to fish. So the data we were sitting in this meeting that was being presented showed all the fish being tracked, stopping at this one crossing and unable to access their spawning grounds beyond the disturbance created by this pipeline construction. And we're sitting there and there was no information presented about the pipeline crossing, the errors that CGL made during their construction, and no admittance to the fact that DFO would have had to sign off on a permit for any in-stream works, such as a pipeline crossing, during the adult migration of an endangered sockeye population that are currently being rebuilt. So just despite the hundreds of thousands of dollars that went into this tracking work and the millions that went into the rebuilding plan for Maurice River sockeye, DFO and the BCEAO, the Environmental Assessment Office, still somehow justified allowing a pipeline to be constructed right at a critical time for salmon. This just feels like a huge like why moment. Like if you're DFO, why sign both permits? Like why keep us busy doing all this work while you're behind the scenes doing conflicting activities in tandem with our work? It's just complete nonsense. So from a professional standpoint, it just feels like we're screaming into the void at this point. There's so much evidence pointing to the urgency for us to protect what we have left, yet we're not seeing those priorities reflected by institutions of power at every level. I've talked with so many community members about their concerns of this pipeline specifically, and really just any impact to the environment that would disrupt our livelihoods. And people at large, or in general, want to return to old villages. They want to return to old fishing sites, revive old harvesting practices. They don't want to have construction sites and man camps at these old places that hold so much history and power. It's on totally different pages. There seems to be just a complete disconnect between what most people are saying and feeling about wanting the Lihip as is for our benefit compared to what is being signed off on in closed door meeting rooms. That, again, like same as Stephen, like a lot of this information is super confidential. If you speak out against it, you're shamed or bullied. And that no voice is being silenced where the yes voice is just holding all the power in the space right now. And then what I'm hearing from youth through other kind of aspects of the work that I do is the longing for community building, for language and for culture and all the things that the land connects us back to. So the youth that I've spoken to see that whole picture without all of these extra filters that we seem to acquire as we get older that make people prioritize concerns of securing short-term jobs or individual success, rather than seeing how the Lihip is the security that we need, the security for food, for healing, for culture, for language. It holds everything we need, and the youth can see that. So in general, the youth that I've talked to are looking at this project as a major threat to our way of life and coming up with really creative pathways around this, which I think is super inspiring and nice to lean on when, it feels like a bit of a hopeless situation. Although I should say that some of the youth have also mentioned it feels like they're screaming into the void. Like they'll post something and get 2 likes or, host a meeting and only the same kind of people show up, even though at large people don't want this, but people are generally also afraid to speak out or show up. But despite that negativity, I've heard some really brilliant conversations about this being a moment or an opportunity for community building and finding ways to address everyone's needs, but not at the demise of the one thing that keeps us whole. So echoing exactly what Stephen said, the land and the water are never worth sacrificing, especially when we have so much wealth and so many tools right at our fingertips. If we could just remember how to be resourceful, all of that history is in us and it's right there on the land. So as we've seen in other communities or other places that have invited industry, you can throw money at a community to build the infrastructure and the programming that supports healthy communities, but it won't really get to healing the core of the problem, not in the same way that reconnecting to the land does, which is something that is also kind of reflected in my visits to the Cranberry Junction when I got to go visit the Gitanyow Hereditary blockade. Like, so many cool things are happening, so much like love and family vibes. It's just like, that's exactly what you need. And that's what comes from the frontline work. So yeah, grateful for the leadership from the Gitanyow and grateful for each of you for showing up and joining this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Taylor. Yeah, I think it's really important to see what is being promised through these environmental assessments, through the permits. Everything's going to be okay. We'll mitigate the impacts to fish. And someone like Taylor, who's seen firsthand what the reality is, we can't ignore that. And so I think that those lessons learned from our Wet'suwet'en neighbors should always be front and center as the youth voice as well, needs to guide everything that we're doing. So thank you, Gitxsan, Taylor. Kolin, you're next up. So Kolin is a pretty young guy, but he's been a land defender for a long time in his short life. And now he's an elected leader for the Kispiox Band and holding this dual role of being a Wilp member and an elected leader as well, and is a part of this coalition that's brought forward a court case. And so we're going to hear from him on what that is, what's involved, and some of the support that you've gotten more recently from maybe the Union of BC Indian Chiefs and others. So yeah, why don't you share a little bit with us, Kolin?
Gitxsan Tara, and really happy to be here. I'm a Yuksa, everyone. Hoki of Wilp Sustainability. And as mentioned, I wear quite a few hats. Over the past 5 years, there's been land defense, but then I also got involved with village politics, being on council, first as councillor, and then last July, or the July previous, becoming the elected chief councillor for the village of Kispiox. And yeah, I'll just talk a bit about the lawsuit with the BC Energy Regulator, because that's I guess just one way to frame a lot of what's been happening. And I guess, one of the main things I really want to say about, pipeline business in general, before we get into it, it's sloppy. It's messy. It's often roughshod. And, the whole reason that, I even got into village council to begin with was to stop what I felt was a lot of these very undemocratic, manipulative practices that we had seen over and over in our neighboring communities. I think, as rightfully pointed out by the other panelists, all these discussions are locked behind NDAs. Quite often as a community member, it's impossible to even find out what your own government has signed on to. And often there's provisions in these agreements that very much restrict your ability as a community member to do so, and even place your own elected officials in a situation where they ultimately have to quell any dissent and opinion from the community. And then that leads to all sorts of awful dynamics. And so, that's just a bit of background why I even got involved in council. But just recently, in the 5-minute intro, it mentioned we all thought PRGT was gone, after everything fell through with Petronas and Lilo Island. And once it was resurrected, we found that a lot of the goalposts had been moved. And, there was, requirements before they could even begin construction for this pipeline, that they had to assess the cumulative effects. Because, in the past decade, we've had all sorts of major overhauls of a lot of environmental, industry related regulations in this province, including a whole new Environmental Assessment Act, including the Yahi decision, including all this new language that was being brought to the table, that was forcibly brought to the table because British Columbia and industry were repeatedly getting called out in lawsuits and in other forums for essentially, violating people's rights and just making a mess of people's environments with very little repercussions. And so with this lawsuit, it's a judicial review of the construction start for the PRGT pipeline. And so I mentioned, one of the things was like this pipeline goes very close to our village, within 10 kilometers. It crosses all of our major waterways. And there's also a permitted compressor station, like very close to our community. This isn't just way out in the bush, way out in the territories. It's right outside of Kispiox. And this would also include man camps of, upwards 800, 1,000 people. And so like we're gonna feel this. Like it's like I mentioned, it's not going to be out in the bush, it's going to be right there. And we have very minimal infrastructure in our community. We have I guess we're in that very sensitive rural type situation where this would be just a huge impact and a danger, I think, for a lot of our community members. And that's been spoken out many times. We're vulnerable. We have issues with housing. We have issues with poverty. We have, a lot of substance abuse issues that we're, working on helping people heal through in the community. And, to put a man camp, which, is, I think a lot of people who've dealt with them in many different nations across this province have all pointed out, is that this only exacerbates a lot of these issues. And so, the sentiment of the community members that I've spoken to, the sentiment at all our community meetings that we've hosted here in Anspayach, which is the original name for Kispiox, and, the general sentiment of council is that this shouldn't just happen without us being involved, without the community members having a say. And I guess to begin with, I think I need to point this out because a lot of people have a hard time even, fathoming, the current situation, because everyone's frame of reference is Coastal GasLink, where you had the elected band councils who signed on to the project, with their NDAs, but then you had the hereditary chiefs who were in opposition. And so I think everyone's first gut reaction is that the band councils signed on Gitxsan territory and it's hereditary chiefs who are opposing after seeing Gitanyow. But the fact of the matter is not a single band council has signed on to this project. And, to me, that's almost crazy that the province will be going to the Wet'suwet'en, and saying, okay, a handful of elected chief councillors can sign on to this, behind closed doors. And then for them to basically 180 their own precedent and then go to Gitxsan territory and say, well, actually, band councils don't matter. And, meanwhile, the whole narrative being used to literally sick provincially funded police on people in horrifically violent ways. And you can see this all if you watch Yinta, which just came out on Netflix. But that rationale that, was implied and used by the province, it's, it was empty. So to me, like, as someone who is in a elected seat, that just proved to me that, you know, from the provincial standpoint, this is a major issue for everyone in BC, that whoever is willing to take the money is the rightful signatory when it comes to any of the territories. And across the board, there's no referendums. Across the board, there's no, you know, there's no transparency. And but I mean, I'm a bit veering off because, you know, just getting back to the lawsuit. So for the judicial review, that's currently proceeding through the courts. It's only one step, and what I think is going to be a very multi-pronged process of putting pressure on this pipeline at all levels. And you know, it's I think we'll see probably, you know, by early next year how effective it'll be. But until then, we have these numerous timelines that, you know, I think we're going to need action at every step. Like November 25th is when the permits are scheduled to expire for the PRGT pipeline, or the environmental assessment certificates. And so that's going to be the major decision. I think that was touched on by Kai. And, you know, if the province at that point says, well, actually, yeah, like, you know, whatever clear cutting you did on the Nisga'a territories is sufficient for this pipeline to be considered substantially started, then, you know, all the permits, you know, going all the way out east will last indefinitely. If the province makes that decision, then we're going to have to challenge that in the courts as well, every step of the way, because, you know, it's almost even hard to explain just how haywire this whole process is. And, you know, like the title of this mentions, you know, there's no endpoint for this pipeline. You know, there's no final investment decision. There's no clarity. And, you know, for myself, I would be very concerned, you know, for our neighbors, our relatives of the Nisga'a. And because, you know, for one hand, it's very different to be the owner of a project as opposed to, you know, simply being a signatory on an impact benefits agreement. You know, you have nothing but risk, and it's a very high risk last minute project. And, you know, I think in some alternate reality, you know, everyone could have been brought on board for a project. You know, it might not necessarily be a pipeline, but I think there's steps you need for consent and cooperation. That just doesn't exist. It's chaos at every community along the right of way. And so for me, that's a super high risk investment. And I think, you know, the only people who'd win out right now are the people who are taking money from Nisga'a, Lisims, and Western LNG to do the construction. And then also if there is a loan that is given to the Nisga'a Lisims government, you know, whether that's, you know, $50 billion or what have you, to afford to build this pipeline as well as the terminal, then, you know, I think whoever gets the bonuses, they'll win. But then it's the nation that holds the risk. It's the nation that has to do the cleanup. It's the nation that is on the hook if anything goes wrong. And so I mean, just as someone who, like, I hear you have elections, and, you know, as someone who took pretty hardline stance in my community when it came to, you know, never consenting as a leader to being in any spaces where, you know, I could receive monetary remuneration, you know, based on what I believe belongs to the collective. You know, I think, you know, my hope would be for any leadership, especially if they're engaging in very high risk financial activities with nation assets, you know, there should be a commitment to not take any bonuses on that. You know, if it succeeds, then everyone succeeds. But, you know, it's just my worry that, you know, the way the lot of this is set up, like, not everyone's going to be a winner. And I think, you know, we share a lot of the same economic circumstances as the Nisga'a. as the Gitanyow, I think we're all trying to figure out ways to, derive a livelihood with our lachia, and without destroying it, because it's a part of our cultural identity, and at the end of the day, we're all related up here. And I guess I just want to, finally, I'm thinking I'm taking a little longer. I tend to ramble, but I just really want to shout out, to the Gitanyow Ganeta for holding it down in the Cranberry, because, all these actions, they add up to painting that picture that should make it clear that, nobody who's responsible for any amount of funds whatsoever should be investing in this project, because on one hand, you're probably going to be investing in a project that will rely on a lot of people turning blind eyes to what I think should be due process that we just haven't seen. Like we if a project like this is ever to happen, like, it needs regulation. It can't be subject to non-compliance order over non-compliance order. Like, we have such low standards that we've seen across the board. And so just in the meantime, like, anyone who makes noise out there, it adds up to that investor uncertainty. And the Gitanyow are proving that they'll hold down their territories, they'll hold down their borders, and they're willing to stick it out for the long run. And they've sent that message loud and clear to the youth too, that they're in it for the long run. And likewise, shout out to Maskukwinuks of Wilp Sustainability, who is also shutting down the right of way on her territory. And that's a beautiful thing to see. And that's one of my relatives through the Fireweed clan. And yeah, I just a lot of respect too to my Nisga'a relatives. And I have a great grandfather who came from the Nass, Simon Robinson. And at some point I've been wanting to trace the genealogy to find out who my relatives are in that neck of the woods. And yeah, so I guess that's just some of the concerns that I raise a bit from the political perspective. And just one more thing finally.
Mhm.
I had a chance to talk with Nathan Cullen. I had a chance to pose a question to Premier Eby, just in respect to some of the work that I've done. And my big question that I kept pressing them with is, the Gitxsan, a sovereign nation, burned an agreement with the province. What is your response? Nathan, he didn't have an answer. And so to me, this is a huge diplomatic issue. And are they going to honor that? And to me, if that line's broken, then there's no reason for that pipeline to go through. And when I asked David Eby, he also sidestepped it. But that's just last thing I wanted to mention. That was, in my role as chief counselor, I'll sometimes run into these folks.
Well, thank you for doing that, Colin. Thanks for leveraging your role to hold the province accountable at all levels, through the lawsuit, but also through just grabbing them by the shirt collar at AFN meetings and EBCIC meetings and getting in their grill. We really appreciate it. And the high ethical standard that you hold yourself to. I mean, that's something that every politician, every elected person in the province could learn from. And maybe they'd still have seats, memo to Nathan Cullen, if they were to adopt the Cullen Code of Ethics. I wanted to just offer a quick reflection and thank you, Colin, for reminding everybody of how closely related these communities are, because the division that's been created is a product of colonialism. This is created by the province, and you can see through the pipeline that they're trying to drive wedges again between communities. And this thing, the PRGT construction this summer, has the province's fingerprints all over it. So we're trying what we can through freedom of information requests to dig out the truth behind this project. Tara, did you have any reflections or anything that jumped out at you from the the words of our panelists tonight?
Thanks. Yeah, so many different threads to follow, and certainly the chat is live with a lot of questions and comments. So thanks everyone for engaging. I think just looking at some of the questions, and I don't have time to do a full breakdown of what Gitanyow is up to. So we've heard about the cranberry blockade, but there's also a lot of work on the permitting and on the certificate and on legal options that we are consistently pursuing and have been building our paper trail for over a year. So there's a multi-pronged approach that Gitanyow has been taking, included in that is a lot of communication, outreach, public awareness. I'm joining this weekend the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. So we have these amazing allies who are really saying, you know, the climate, as Taylor said, is crisis enough. If we add another major project to that, we're going to reach tipping points very quickly, as we are already there. But what I've noticed in the questions is there's a little uncertainty around the nations who've, quote, signed on. And so we've talked about these certificates and these permits being out of date. So the agreements are as well. And Kolin mentioned how messy this process is. And so in some cases, they'll sign with the band council. In some cases, they'll sign with hereditary chiefs. And they will sign with those who say yes. And so free, prior, informed consent means that all of us as Indigenous people have a right to be included in decision-making. We have the right to access independent, neutral information and science to make our decisions on. And that those consent, if consent is granted, we need to know what that is and not in these non-disclosure and confidential agreements. And so as the certificate expires November 25th, so too do all of these agreements. They are out of date. Some of the people who signed them have passed on. Some of them are no longer in office, and some of them are no longer adequately representing their people. And so I think it's important to understand that there's no official sort of sign-on list of people who can say that they've got the full support of their nation and they're completely 100% on board with this project. I think that would be a very much a false and misleading statement at this point in time. And so look to that November 25th date as if there's going to be full support from some nations, then it's going to be new agreements. None of these agreements are implementable in 2024. The company is trying to renegotiate. The province is just sort of sitting on them, holding them as some type of certainty, but I don't think that they would be able to implement them either. There's just too much that has changed. And so I just wanted to touch on that because it did kind of come up in the Q&A as something that people were a little confused about, but I really appreciate every other kind of thread and point that's been made by our amazing panelists, and thanks, Kai.
Yeah, we are coming to the end of our hour here, but I did want to have a chance to hear from each of us again on ways that people listening can help. We've got over 200 people on the call tonight. And all of those people have friends and family and professional contacts as well. And so I wanted to go back to Stephen briefly for your final words. Yeah, what do you want people to take away from this conversation? And are there ways that that people can help?
Yes, good people to remember what panelists have said about the pipeline and how it was obtained and pushed through. And I agree with some of the panels say that we all agree to this pipeline route. We did not all agree. We ourselves in Nisga'a, I think, are in a real tight spot because of what's going on. We got to look at permits. We don't know nothing about it. We have not seen no environmentalists on our land or anything. We know that they have until November 24th for this story. I believe that's why there's been so much work. I'm worried about it because I heard the Green Party stating that if they had people elected, they would fight this pipeline. And I've mentioned that to some of our own people, and they say they can't do that. I'm pretty surprised at that. And the last thing I would like to say is, this is to Rebecca Scott. She made a remark in one of her papers that I read that regardless of what happens up north with the protest, that they were going to go ahead with the pipeline in the Nass and continue with building it. That includes our lava beds. I was told that they were going to put that lava beds back into its original state. That's humanly impossible. Rebecca Scott, you come up here. You come up here and you talk to our chiefs. You tell them why you think that you can do what you want to do and destroy our land without their consent. To the next president, or the president today, I want to know how you're going to deal with this issue and start making reports to our people exactly what kind of predicament we're in. What have we given up besides the land? I know, and I've read it's costing billions of dollars for this pipeline. You tell us what it is. You come and meet with our people, our chiefs, our matriarchs. You tell our matriarchs, why are you going to destroy our land? Where are their children going to get the berries and the salmon and stuff so they can be taught to preserve? Our young people, you should be really concerned of what's going on around you. Take a look at the pipeline route. It goes right through the heart of our territory. We have no guarantee whatsoever that if something happens to that pipeline and there's an explosion, that it'll come right down the pipeline route and destroy most of our nation with fire. Nobody asked to dig up the lava beds. We have 3,500 people that perished in the volcano. So I'm saying to you, Rebecca Scott, if you want to dig up our pipe and our lava beds, you come up here and you talk to our elders and you tell them the reason why you're going to do that. We are very protective people when it comes to stuff like this. You
Thank you,
cannot
Stephen.
take our land, our chief's land, and not give nothing back in return. So I'm saying to you, and the powers that be that made this decision without the knowledge of our nation, to come up here and meet with our people and explain why you destroyed so much of our land in such a short period of time.
Thank you, Stephen. And I know that many of the people on this call will take up your call with their newly elected representatives. We're going to provide resources in the next week as we find out what the final election results are for people across the province to carry that message to people. Hi, Jacob. Thanks for listening in. I'm glad you're here. I wanted to put the same question to our other panelists. We are just over time, but if everyone can stay for another 5 minutes, I want to hear from both Taylor and Kolin one more time. What do you want people to take away from this, and how can people listening help?
First, just wanted to say a huge thank you to Stephen for coming and sharing today. It's so comforting to hear such a strong voice coming from the NAS. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And then just really quickly for those viewing right now, of course, in whatever capacity you have, put pressure on the government and the minister to push for an environmental assessment of this pipeline. That's like this huge gap that we haven't even touched on yet, just because it's a quick conversation. If Kai could share links for each of the donation places for the Grenada blockade, as well as Teresa's sanctuary. That would be awesome. And then I wanted to one more quick plug on the youth of the Gitxsanlakw, which is a organization that Colin is a part of, as well as my young cousin Drew. They created after a youth-led community meeting to share information about the pipeline, and they're kind of stepping into this leadership role and doing a lot of important work, bringing voices together. So if Paige or Alexandra could share the links to those 2 links I shared, one of them is a solidarity statement coming from the youth, as well as a petition they've asked people to sign on, just so they know they're not screaming into the void and they have support and a community to back them up. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. And I just have to note too that Taylor is also technically a youth of the Gitxsan Nation. So anyway, yeah, Gitxsan everyone, and it was really, really good to hear from you, Stephen and Kai, Tara, Taylor. I guess just some final thoughts. I think we're in a very strong position, and I'm happy to see that the provincial government's now at a point where the Green Party can have some leverage over this decision making. Hopefully there'll be that hinge. I remember when the original Coastal GasLink raids were happening, the Greens were in that position with their confidence and supply agreement. And at that time they could have dissolved the entire government because of what the NDP were permitting to happen. And that was a discussion that we were actually having with the Green Party leadership down at the legislature as the youth for Wet'suwet'en at that time. And so there's always avenues, and I think especially if you got to hold people to account for their own commitments to legislation like UNDRIP, or even just basic human rights in general. Just there's the notion that people need to provide consent for you to do anything to themselves or their lands. That's a big point then. And just I don't know if you have it, but for Teresa and her dog sanctuary, the address we've been using to fundraise in the meantime is landbackcc@gmail.com, which is short for landbackcommandcenter@gmail.com. And so those funds, we've raised 700 so far. That's already going to be going right to cabins, doggy infrastructure, all that stuff, just for all our neglected res dogs in the area who need a safe place to be, and to find a new home, all that stuff. So we want puppies instead of pipelines.
Good one. Yeah, the res dogs will become territory dogs or Lakip dogs. So that's great. Thank you so much, everybody. All the links that were mentioned are in the chat. So as you're jumping off the webinar, please make sure to copy those. They'll also be sent out in the follow-up email, as will the recording. And so please feel free to share the recording with anyone who is not able to make it. Share the links, follow out all our folks on social media. There will be more events. There will be more opportunities to support everyone here and others. And there will be more information coming in the next month and beyond. So Gitxsan, I thank you all for joining us on this evening. Please take care and have a great rest of your evening. Goodbye, everybody.
Gitxsan.
Sarah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.